Good morning. My name is Lorraine Jacobs. Mark Miller and I co-chair the Sunday Forums, and we welcome and thank you for supporting Sunday Forums. For over 50 years at First Unitarian Society in Milwaukee, the Sunday Forum Lecture Series has showcased speakers. Forums are 1 hour in length and provide a presentation followed by questions. Scheduling and hosting these weekly programs is accomplished by volunteers. The presenters do not receive honoraria. The content of each forum may not always align with the viewpoint of First Unitarian Society in Milwaukee. They are meant to offer topics which can be pursued further independently. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that next Sunday, February 27th, our topic will be the 2022 midterm election and the future of democracy, with Joel McNally presenting. Before we begin today, I'd like to first off ask people to be sure that they're muted because there's some extra noises out there. And then also, I would like to say that we are beginning, the forum committee is beginning to make sure we fit into the revised new old schedule for Sunday mornings. So we will be switching our Zoom forums in March 6th to 10 o'clock in the morning. So we'll tell you more about that later. And today we welcome David Liners, and he'll be introduced by our forum host today, Pat McFarland.
I would like to mention one more thing. You'll be able to, if you go to church, you will be able to view the forum on a large screen in Max Auto Hall, or you can view at home.
Okay, thank you, friends. Well, I'm really happy that David Liners agreed to do this forum because I actually spend a lot of time with his dad, his father. Oh yeah, that would be Dr. Liners, my dentist. And I spent a fair amount of time and my mother's money getting a lot of fillings. He was a great guy and he raised a great son. And so David comes from my hometown of Watertown, Wisconsin. We are both mighty, mighty goslings. I'd like to tell you just briefly about the 19 religious traditions that are part of Wisdom. This is a grassroots organization that works with Christians, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, and Unitarians. And we have 11 local organizations that comprise Wisdom. Our local is called MICA. And David will give a little plug about a MICA event coming on Tuesday night. So David was a Catholic priest, and he served in Mexican churches on the south side of Chicago. And then he became more engaged with all things for justice. He worked with MICA for a while, quite a few years, I think, actually getting MICA started. And we believe in MICA and Wisdom in civic engagement, education, advocacy, community mobilization. And the issues that motivate us are inequity, jobs, in economic development, in transit, in housing, in immigration, in criminal justice, in prison reform. I think we could say David has job security. One of the quotes I liked from him is, "You can't battle for justice by yourself." Welcome, David Liners, my hometown friend.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. Go back to sharing my screen here. I appreciate the chance to be with you today. I'll try and kind of get through things relatively quickly. I want to leave as much time as possible for us to discuss and for questions and things. So just to kind of go through a couple things. So as Pat mentioned, Wisdom is our statewide network. We also have a network within our network called EXPO, which is Ex-Incarcerated People Organizing, which we're very proud of, that actually is also a statewide network comprised of people who are directly impacted by the criminal justice system. This is where we are in Wisdom. Most of us are faith-based organizations, not all. Menachanikim up there is actually on the Menominee Indian Reservation. It's kind of in the wrong place. It should be up more closer to Naomi up there. So Menachanikim is, they're certainly very spiritual in the sense of kind of native spirituality. It's what they bring up, but they're not like a religion based. And we have a lot of individual members that have become part of our organizations in recent years. So anyhow, that's who we are. We're kind of all over. Each of these local organizations looks a little different. We're very decentralized kind of an organization. So people work on local things, as well as all of us together working on some statewide stuff. So I'm just going to launch right into this particular effort that we call justice reinvestment. This is kind of the big picture thing we're trying to accomplish in Wisdom over the next 5 years. Ideally, it could be faster, but we've learned this stuff always takes longer than you think it's going to take. Justice reinvestment really includes 3 things, and they all have to be in there for it to be justice reinvestment. First is we have to close some correctional facilities. We have to close some state prisons, and we'll get to how we can do that. It's not an impossibility. Other states are doing it left and right. We have 3 really good candidates as prisons that need to be closed in Wisconsin. We'll get to why. The second is to make a commitment that we're not going to build any new prisons. Unfortunately, there are still folks in our state who are actually itching to build new prisons. It gets brought up in the legislature from time to time. We need to say no. We need to close some and not build new ones. And as you'll see, if we do that, there is a ton of money available to us that if we don't put it into tax breaks, but we actually reinvest the money into community-based solutions, we can actually deal with some of the problems that lie at the root of why we have people in prison, but we can also rebuild some of the communities that have really been devastated by mass incarceration. Most of you, I think, probably know this. Kind of looking around at pictures, I think I'm not the only one here who can remember 1980, back when my dad was fixing Pat's teeth. Back then, we had like about 4,000 people in our state prison system. Today, it's over 20,000. And the state hasn't grown very much. The total population of Wisconsin hasn't changed much in the last 30 or 40 years. We keep hovering around 5 million people in Wisconsin. But that's what's happened to our prison population. It's just skyrocketed. We can go, I'm not going to go into it now if anybody's interested. The amount of money we spend on it has gone up by that. Anytime you hear somebody talking about the growth of the state bureaucracy, this is where it is. The state bureaucracy didn't grow because we have so many more people working for the DNR or because we have so many people working in healthcare and education. The state bureaucracy has grown exponentially in the last 40 years because the Department of Corrections has gone up to having over 10,000 employees statewide. It costs us a fortune. It costs us $1.3 billion a year. We also have a huge problem of racial disparities. So sorry about the numbers. If you know the old saying that there's 3 kinds of people in the world, those who can do math and those who can't. But anyhow, this is just some numbers just to help us grasp the depth of our racial disparity issues in Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, we incarcerate about 1 out of every 36 African-American adults. Nationwide, in a country where we are shamed by the amount of African-American people we incarcerate, it's about 1 out of 81. The next closest state to us, by the way, is 1 out of every 46. So our rate of incarceration for African-American folks is the highest in the country, which kind of by definition makes it the highest in the world, because our country incarcerates way more people than anybody else. Another way to look at it, about 6% of Wisconsin's population identifies as African-American, yet they're 42% of the prison population. Like, it's that out of whack. Just as a note, my Menachanikim friends would tell me to let you know this. The out of whackness if that's a word, of incarceration of Native American folks is about the same as African American folks. We also incarcerate Native American folks at a way higher rate than we do white folks. And in Wisconsin, if you're African American, you are 12 times more likely to be in a state prison than if you're white. That's second in the country. Somehow New Jersey beat us in that one, in that particular category, but it's just that they incarcerate fewer white people is what the issue is. So as you can see, we have a huge problem. And we could spend, there's a report that came out. This is all taken from a report by the Sentencing Project. It's a group out of Washington, D.C. You may just want to make a note of it. Look up Sentencing Project, Racial Disparities Report. This is all just from the end of last year. It goes into it, and it goes into some of the underlying reasons, which are not unlike what you're imagining. You know, in a certain sense, the prison system is where everything else we do wrong in society comes home to roost. It's, you know, the disparities in our education system, in our housing, disparities in everything else you can think of, basically end up as disparities here. And the criminal legal system not only doesn't fix it, it makes it worse. It actually magnifies the racial disparities that we have coming from the rest of society. I also want to point out that other states are doing better than we are. Almost everybody had that big upswing that you saw in that graph before. But other states are really doing stuff to bring it down. And I want you to notice it's not just Democrats. Michigan, which actually looks a lot like us politically, they're very, very similar to us in a whole lot of ways. They've actually reduced their prison population by almost 15% in the last 12, 13 years. Illinois, almost 10%. Indiana, Iowa, Ohio, Minnesota, these are all the states right around us. Minnesota, which started with only half the incarceration we have, has actually reduced their prison population. Well, we have increased ours by 4.4%. Other states, Texas is closing prisons because they've figured out ways to reduce their prison population. So we can do this. We get to real quick the three institutions we think need to be closed. This is a picture of the front of the Green Bay Correctional Institution. I don't know if you've ever driven by there. If you ever go to Lambeau Field, you drive right past it. It kind of looks, I always think of the Shawshank Redemption when I see this. Green Bay Correctional Institution was built in 1898, and it's not our oldest prison. The three places we think need to be closed are GBCI, Green Bay, Waupun, and the Milwaukee Secure Detention Facility, which is MSDF. I'll get to the reasons for each. But first, back to the math people here. Green Bay Correctional Institution was built in 1898. It currently houses 931 people. And in 2021, operating expenses, not the expenses of maintaining a 125-year-old building, operating expenses, not the upgrades that they needed, operating expenses was over $44 million. Waupun, have you ever seen Waupun prison? It's right in the middle of Waupun. It's literally the middle of downtown Waupun. The town actually grew up around it. It was built in 1854. We became a state in 1848. The Waupun prison was built in 1854. My house was built in 1931, and we're having to replace everything. Just imagine a big old facility that old. It currently has, as of this morning, 934 people living in it. And last year, they cost us just less than $50 million to run. The Milwaukee Secure Detention Facility, again, I'm going to try not to get distracted because I could go on. I could rant for 45 minutes. I could use the rest of our time talking about MSDF. This is the building. It's sitting it's downtown. It's near St. Ben's. It's near the courthouse. It's right next to the expressway. It's horrible. It was built in 2000. The building you see there looks like it has windows. That's actually a facade. There's a facade around the outside that has windows. Inside of that, there's a fire escape. And inside of that is a solid brick wall. people inside that 15-story building never see the sun. They don't know if it's daytime or nighttime, but they sure know if it's hot because there's no air conditioning. And they've upgraded the ventilation. We've been complaining about MSDF for years. We think they should close it. They've fixed up the ventilation system, and they actually cut out some little windows recently. But it holds people on revocation holds. Remember that thought, revocation holds, because we're going to come back to it. It currently, as of today, has 463 people in it and cost us over $45 million last year. So we believe Wisconsin has at least $1 billion decision. That's what $1 billion looks like. Decision to make. Waupun and Green Bay are past their useful life. These places can't be fixed up much longer. We're either going to have to close them and figure out how to live without them, or we're going to have to build a new prison. Basically, a new prison would cost about $500 million to build. And the interest, we do bonds to build prisons. The interest would be $400 million. And they tell us that because it would be a modern building, they could run it for just $40 million instead of the $50 million that we spend now, because it would, wouldn't be so drafty and whatnot. But still, over 20 years, that's over $1 billion, not to mention the money we're currently spending. So we have that decision to make. If we can close these places and not build a new prison, we would have at least that much money, probably, and much more, plus all the operating costs you saw before that we could spend. So we're going to do real quick. How could we close down 3 prisons? Right. So here's the math, and I'm just going to talk about these issues a little bit. And again, sorry if I hope I don't overwhelm you, but jot down questions. We can go back and unpack things later if you need. We have 5,000 people out of the 20,000 or 22,000 in our prisons right now who have been re-incarcerated for crimeless revocations. Here's what that means. These are people who have been to prison before for something else. They finished their sentence. They came home on extended supervision, which is kind of like parole, but under truth in sentencing, that's what it's called. And they broke a rule of supervision, and for that reason got sent back to prison. Rules of supervision can include, and honestly, I know people who've gotten in trouble for each of these, accepting a job without prior authorization from your parole officer, leaving the state without prior authorization from your parole officer. I love this one. This is really a rule. Missing a scheduled or unscheduled meeting with your parole officer. You can literally be, that's a reason to be disciplined for missing an unscheduled meeting with your parole officer. It can also be for breaking any local, state, or federal law, or doing anything that is not in the best interest of your rehabilitation. That's just a few. There's 18 rules everybody lives under. Those are some of them. Some of them it's you can't associate with certain people. Some of it's you can't drink alcohol. Some of it is there's a whole bunch of different things. There's 5,000 people right now in our prisons who were not convicted of a new crime. They were sent back for breaking a rule. Often enough, it's because they failed a drug test. They tested positive for marijuana. So when somebody tells you there's nobody in prison for marijuana, not true. A lot of those 5,000 people are in prison because the rule they broke is that they tested positive for having marijuana in their system or THC in their system. There's 5,000 of those people, about 4,000 a year. They actually spend an average of about 18 months back in prison on crimeless revocations. We rounded it down to 5,000. We have more than 2,000 people who've been incarcerated for more than 20 years and who are either eligible for parole or compassionate release. We have some very old people in our prisons. We have some very, very sick people in our prisons. We actually just opened a new assisted living facility in one of our prisons, which should tell you, like, if you need to be in assisted living, you're probably not a big danger to the society. And we actually could be releasing a lot more people if we got more aggressive. We actually even have laws that would allow us to legally release those folks. If we maxed out the amount we spent on treatment alternatives and diversion, so on the front end of the system, if we had more alternative programs that judges could say, yeah, I'm going to send you to a treatment program and we'll monitor you rather than send you to prison. If you can get your mental health and or your substance use disorder issue taken care of, there's no need for you to go to prison. Like, that's the problem. The problem isn't that you're a bad person. There's also another program called the Earned Early Release that actually people are eligible for within the prisons. We just simply don't have the capacity to get enough people into the program. That could get 1,000 people a year out at least a year early. If you add all those numbers up, you're at about 10,000. The combined populations of Green Bay Correctional Institution, Waupun, and MSDF combined is less than 2,500. So for us to reduce the prison population enough to close those 3 facilities is not some sort of wishful thinking. It's really just doing the common sense thing. These, by the way, are the kinds of things they have done in other states, particularly the crimeless revocations. Again, Texas puts us to shame. Texas has almost stopped reincarnation. We think of Texas as being the, tough on crime place. They've almost stopped sending people back to prison for crimeless revocations. Hence, they've closed a couple of prisons recently. Just in case anybody's worried, we'd still have 33 more places to send people. Okay, there's a whole lot of other prisons. So I've heard people say, I don't know, they got some bad guys up there in Green Bay. That's all right. We got 33 other places to send them. If we could get enough people out of the prisons, we could readjust. We have prisons, as you'll see, most of them are concentrated in the center of the state, but we have plenty of prisons for everybody else to go to. And then here's the last thing I want to do before we kind of start moving over toward discussion and questions, is that the $1 billion we don't spend on a new prison and that we don't spend on maintaining these prisons needs to be put into a justice reinvestment fund. This is one of the reasons we need people, all of us, to be kind of constantly in the ear of our decision makers. Some of you, I found it a little disheartening that a couple of weeks ago, the Legislative Fiscal Bureau discovered that we were going to run a surplus in Wisconsin this current year because we're actually, the state coffers are taking in more money than they projected. The first response by both parties was to say, let's do a tax break. What we need to do is say, when we save this money, we need to demand that it get put into these kinds of things that can help people. Treatment, alternative, and diversion programs we talked about before. The more we spend on those, the fewer people we send to prison, the more money we save. It's a virtuous circle. We've been caught in vicious circles for years. This could create a virtuous circle. Housing supports. There's a huge problem with homelessness or being poorly housed of people coming home from jail and prison. A good number of people who are released from our state prisons are essentially released homeless. And it's really tough to make a go of it. It's really tough to meet all those rules of supervision, like you have to be home by 8 o'clock at night if you have no home to go to. It's really hard to hold a job. Housing is a particular issue for women coming home from prison because most women coming home from prison, their number one priority in life is to reunite their family and to get their kids back. And you can't get your kids back if you don't have a stable home and you don't have a decent place to bring them to. So that in itself is a place we could invest a lot of this money. There's a lot of programs, they're being used in places like Madison and Milwaukee called violence interrupters. It's a really intriguing thing. I'd actually suggest it as a forum. In Milwaukee, I think it's called 411 for Life or some such thing. And it's actually, they recruit people who have been involved in criminal activities or at some point in their past. People who might actually have been in gangs and that sort of thing, but they're recruiting, they're people who want to kind of make a difference in the community. They try to go to get in between when there's an issue. A lot of what happens with the violence that you hear about, it's a lot of Hatfields and McCoys kind of thing. I mean, it's like, one of your guys shot one of our guys, so we're going to shoot one of your guys. There's a lot of that kind of thing. Violence interrupters, the first place they go is to hospitals when there's a shooting, and try and meet the family and the friends of the person who was shot, to talk to them, to be sure that they're not planning some sort of revenge thing, to try to kind of figure out how to negotiate things between people. So it's not having a law enforcement response. It's actually having a response with kind of trusted messengers. It's a great kind of a program that really could be much more funded and could be much more greatly used. And it's using the resources of the community itself. It's using, in a certain sense, elders from within the community who can talk to people they know, people in their own community. As everybody knows, I think everybody agrees, we need lots more mental health and behavioral health services. A lot of the root things, and again, they're getting a little more funding these days, needs a lot more. Substance abuse treatment programs. We need really quality programs, and we need them on demand. We need them the day that somebody needs them. There's nothing worse than somebody with a substance use disorder being told that there's a 6-month waiting list. The chances that they're just going to say, okay, I'll hang on until then, are not good. We need job training. We need mentoring. We need transitional jobs for people when they come home. People, when they come home from prison, what they need is a place to stay and a job. If they have that, their chances of succeeding are much greater. And then if they're also kind of welcomed into a community, which is what like our group like Expo and Project Return and things are trying to do, is really create communities for people to come back into. If we could invest in all those things, I left one off of this list, I'm sorry, but lead abatement. If we really want to deal with the issues down the road, we just have to stop lead poisoning. I mean, we haven't used lead in paint for 40 years, but we're still, lead poisoning children left and right. And I mean, that actually creates a lot of things. So there's lots of places to invest this $1 billion that would actually impact exactly the communities that have been devastated by mass incarceration. And that's my contact information. If anybody wants to contact me about how to get involved or what more you want to know. But I did want to leave as much time as possible for folks to ask questions, make comments, complain, whatever you'd like to do. So I'll see if we have any questions.
Thank you, David. We'll work on that.
Just
David,
real
tell us
quickly,
about-
Oh, wait, what, Mark? Bruce?
the chat has been disabled, at least for me, so we can't use that apparently for asking questions.
Same here.
I do have, do you have chat, Pat?
Nope,
Oh,
I tried.
okay. Well, did anyone have a question to just ask? But if you raise your hand.
Paul? Go ahead, Paul.
Oh, okay. David,
Yes.
my name's Paul Geenan. I'm from First Unitarian. And we've been working on a criminal justice data transparency bill. And I don't want to talk about that bill. I want to ask you a question about Republicans. We've been talking to Republicans for about 12 months. And here's what we've been hearing. We support reforms on the back end, but not the front end. We have other priorities. And I guess my experience is that racial disparities is a non-starter. So we're working on trying to communicate with Republicans. And one of the changes that I'm looking at is, instead of talking about the number of prisoners, to talk about dollars spent. And the second one is to view this as an investment rather than an expense. So, and specifically, we're talking to Coinga and Van Weingart. Do you have any experience in talking to the other side of the aisle, and any thoughts?
A little. So I've actually been told by people that we are really bad messengers for saying we can save the state money because they don't believe that we care about that. But I can tell you that the treatment alternatives and diversions they get, and actually that's had very bipartisan support. Now it's been kind of tepid. I mean, we've been inching it up bit by bit. It needs to be about $25 million a year. We've gone from 0 up to 10. So that's something that they can really hear, the treatment alternatives and diversions. The other thing is the whole thing of revocations. I think folks get that. And you're right, it's hard to talk about racial disparities. There's certain places you get that if you say there are racial disparities, people understand you saying that you're calling them a racist. It's like, no, we're just saying this is what the reality is. But I think the thing about revocations resonates. There's a group called the Badger Institute, which is actually kind of a libertarian right-wing think tank that weirdly enough agrees with almost everything. They could almost show you this same PowerPoint. You know, so partly it's a matter of we need better messengers that can get that point across, because I think exactly what you're saying, I think it makes sense. There's kind of a libertarian argument that basically just confining people who don't need to be confined kind of goes against, you know, kind of the whole party of liberty kind of concept. So it's hard work. I think there's lots of Republicans who actually get this. You know, and I think we need to be patient and keep at it, because the way they function right now is unless you have a majority of the majority, nothing moves. In other words, everything's decided kind of in the caucus, and you need a majority. I know we have a minority that agree with us, and I know if you ever put it to the whole legislature, we'd have a majority on a lot of these things, but we still don't quite have that majority of the majority. So I think we have to keep up the conversations, and we need to keep finding different messengers. We need to be sure we're getting constituents of the people who, of the Van Wangards and the and company. Okay.
Okay, excuse me, Pat, excuse me. Before we take more questions, I just want to say, I'm the tech host, my very first time. I don't see any way to do anything different with chat. Mine works, but if you do not have access to chat, you have to go to the little smiley face in your row of icons, click on it. There's a raised hand choice
Reaction.
and click on that, and that will show up in your little postage stamp picture, and we'll know you have a question. So I hope that makes sense to people. You're not out of the game because you can't get into chat. You can raise your hand through the reactions. Okay, Pat, thank you. Sorry.
Okay, the order I see the hands is Karen, then Ann, then Nancy, then Molly. So Karen, when you're done, call Ann. Ann, you call Nancy. Nancy, you call on Molly.
I'm Karen Samuelson from First Unitarian, and I thought it was interesting you mentioned lead, and I realize you are focused on adult prisons here, but I've been curious as to whether when they stop these, 13 and 14-year-old carjackers, if they have tested lead levels and if there is any purpose in doing so. I talked to some environmentalists the other day who didn't think that that might manifest itself in that way, but I'm curious as to whether this is a valid issue that we should be exploring.
So I don't know the specific answer to that question. I mean, I certainly think it's a valid issue. I don't quite know how and when lead shows up in tests and things, but I do know we've got a problem, and we've got it in the same general population where we have the incarceration problem.
So I guess we go to Anne now.
Thank you. My question is, to what extent does the employment of the people in these prisons drive their being sustained by both parties? Or is there a dichotomy in support because of the employment of people in their districts?
Kind of. Like I don't want to go overboard here. There is some of that. There's also a great window of opportunity right now. And that's the way I would really want to approach that is right now, there is a horrendous shortage of personnel in the state prisons. And they're losing people because people don't want to work all this forced overtime because prisons are like hospitals. You can't leave them unattended. So I think there's a big opportunity. Waupun, I'll just take Waupun, for example. There's like 4 other prisons within a 15-minute drive of Waupun. There's Fox Lake, there's Oshkosh, there's all these places around. So we could close these prisons and keep everybody there employed, if they'd just be willing to work at a different prison. So I think in a weird way, there's a little opportunity right now with this labor market. And basically being a prison guard is really a lousy job. I mean, it really is. It's why they can't keep them. So yeah, that would be my answer there. So there's a little bit of like the city of Waupun is in a panic. What would happen to Waupun without the prison? It's like, I guess the Horicon Marsh isn't good enough for them. They need a prison too. So anyhow.
Okay, Lorraine, thank you. Thank you, David. Lorraine interrupting again. When you answer your question, that doesn't remove your little hand. So go back to the little smiley face and click on lower my hand or something, and you'll get that off. Okay, Nancy, I think you're next.
Yes. Is there anything that we as individuals can do to impact any of this happening?
Yeah. So, and this is, it's very long term. It's not like that is not like something any of us could do right now today that would change it. Some of it is obvious, vote. But also to talk to your legislators. We don't have, we talked about Republicans before. Democrats, this doesn't really rise high on their list of things they want to do either. So it's not like just, and of course, if you talk to Democrats, they'll say, it's not us, it's the evil Republicans. It's both of them. So we really need to vote, and we need to let the people we're voting for know that this really matters to us. We need to let Governor Evers know that we're kind of disappointed he hasn't been more aggressive. If you remember 4 years ago, he was running ads saying he was going to cut the prison population in half. So part of it is we need to be vocal. You need to kind of talk to your friends. You need to kind of share this stuff. I'm in the process of sending something out to our members saying, that we all need to make a list of 10 to 20 people that you can figure out, how can I share this with them and say, you know what, I heard an interesting presentation today. Because I think people don't know about this. It's not high on people's priority list. It's like a lot of issues. Most people in Wisconsin are kind of oblivious to this whole thing. Like they're just kind of not really aware of what all's going on, and the people it impacts dramatically, but they don't have enough clout themselves to change the system. So it's a political solution that's needed, and we need to get involved, and we need people to just be a lot more vocal about it and say, no, we're not going to keep being patient about this. Like this is too much, too long.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, Molly. Sorry.
You're on mute, Molly?
Oh, mute. You're still muted.
I'm sorry. Congratulations, Lorraine, on being the tech chairman. You're doing a great job. I have a couple, just a quick comment. Members of our church are working very hard with Common Ground on setting up an extensive gold standard tutoring program in the Medford school or in the Milwaukee schools. And that's where my question is going, David. What role do you see literacy as playing in crime rates and education type solutions, offering degree programs, offering literacy instruction within the prisons? But I'm interested in what kind of priority that is for your group and where you see potential there.
It is. We're a little bit involved right now in, especially Expo, as a matter of fact, in trying to, Tommy Thompson is kind of trying to do penance for the fact that he sort of oversaw a lot of that huge increase in the prison population. And he managed to get a whole bunch of money in the state budget for this year to offer like university, like degree type programs in prisons. So we're part of helping to sort of shape that. That does have a big impact. It really does. If everybody who went to prison for more than 4 years came home with a college degree, you'd have a really, really low recidivism rate. So yeah, education has to do with it in a certain sense, kind of like I said earlier, the prison system is where all of these other disparities come home to roost. Our educational disparities eventually end up here. Our disparities in, I don't know if you saw in the newspaper, like the suspension expulsion rates for African-American kids in Milwaukee public schools suddenly shot back up again. Recently, like if we don't keep a handle on it, all those things contribute. There's a lot of things. There's no silver bullet. There's a whole bunch of things that actually all funnel into creating this system. And then, like I said, unfortunately, the system makes it worse. So yeah, anything we can do to deal with disparities in education, in housing, in health, the earlier the better. It's going to help the situation, and then, our focus tends to be more on, once people are actually in contact with the system, there's some things that we could do different there too. So thanks for that.
Barbara? Barbara, do you have your hand up, but we can't hear you?
Might be a microphone problem.
Let's go to BJ and then Dennis and then back to Barbara. So BJ, Dennis, Barbara.
And me.
Oh, Lorraine, I'm sorry.
That's okay. BJ, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I thank you so much for all of this information. I actually know some people already. I'm going to share it with. One thing I would ask is if your group could put together a wonderful one-pager of talking points. Just to summarize the things that you said and what are the key things that we need to share with our friends, with our legislators. It would also be great if someone could put together basically what they call an elevator speech. So if you've got contact with someone for 30 seconds or a minute, you can hit a couple of big things. Did you know that we could take this $1 billion of just closing 3 prisons and do this? Just something to spark their brain. I would be happy to work with somebody on drafting that if you need to, but I so appreciate how you were able to give us so much information so clearly and so quickly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we are working on some of that stuff, but yeah, hey, get in touch with me. We'd be happy to include you in the little communications that they're going to be working on quite soon.
Barbara, do you think you're up for speaking? No, sorry. Okay, I'll skip. And Dennis?
Yeah, I've got some good friends in Watertown, and I tell you, is they're much more fierce mascot than a fighting gosling.
There you go.
Boy, this is a wonderful presentation. Thanks for bumming us out totally with all the negative news, but more importantly, for significant things that can be done. That is really encouraging. I have kind of two questions. One is, we've heard so much about the privatization of prison, the industry in America. Is that much in Wisconsin? And the other, you talked about all this job retraining and so on, but it seems to me a basic problem is there aren't a lot of jobs here at those fundamental kind of manufacturing type levels. So much of them have gone to Mexico and China.
Yeah, so real quickly, we have, I'll cheer you up. We have 3 good things in Wisconsin. We have no private prisons, we have no death penalty, and we have no bail bondsmen, which actually is 3 really good things we need to hang on to. There is the privatization of a lot of stuff in the prison system. Everything from, actually, if you want to send someone money who's in prison, somehow a private company gets a cut of that. Anything anybody wants to buy has to run through one, at the moment, one vendor, that kind of thing. So there is some privatization around the edges. There's some ways people are employed making furniture that somebody's off making all kinds of money on. There's all kinds of stuff like that. But at least we don't have private prisons, thank God, at the moment. I'm sorry, and I lost real quick. The second half of your question was about?
It seemed like there aren't those kind of manufacturing of basic level jobs here in the state, in the city.
Right. I mean, yeah, that's a part of it. There's a whole issue, it ties into all of our other system. It ties into transportation. It ties into where there are jobs and things. At the moment, guys are telling me it's easier to find a job than an apartment at the moment, because right now, as we speak, there are jobs. But again, that's a lot of entry-level jobs. Not everybody's going to do construction until they're 65. Not everybody's going to be a security guard, so security guard's tough for people coming home from prison. But you're right. We need more, more of that. We need to kind of rebuild some of that base. So, but we also need, there's a lot of really smart people in prison. So even to the whole thing about the university classes, there are people who are capable of doing IT. There's people who are capable of managing things. I work with some people who are way more talented than me, who spent a lot of time in prison. So we also need to kind of expand what we allow people to get into. There's also a whole nother issue about licensing. Like for some reason, you can't be a dog groomer if you have a felony. A hairstylist, like there's all kinds of licenses we need to make more available for people, but we need to give people more tracks to get into all parts of the economy.
Oh, thank you.
Go ahead, Dan.
A couple comments. One is that there must be a challenge with messaging this information out. Number one, the stats that I just saw this morning were very clear. If you just take 1,000 inmates in Green Bay and divide it into the 45 million, it's 45,000 a year, almost 4,000 a month per prisoner. So also, I like to have more access or have more statistics because the numbers speak for themselves. This is easy, and Republicans are supposed to be business minded. So I think we need to start there. Something I have to ask about is number 2 is a statistic that'd be nice to know. You had that graph from 1980 to now, the big growth in DOC. What is comparable to DNR, the other departments? It'd be nice to see that in terms of not dollars, but people.
Oh, that's really good.
That does speak to it. Thirdly, I understand that Minnesota, they have a half the prison population of Wisconsin, even though they have a population almost equal to our state populations are almost equal. A criticism of that comparison is that Minnesota has a heavy county, I understand a heavy county support for prisons or jails. Is that comparable? Or not? And how do I find that out is my question.
Okay. Really good questions. First, all the information, the stuff on the racial disparities came from the Sentencing Project this morning. Everything else comes from the Department of Corrections website. They actually have, if you go to the Department of Corrections website and just find data, it's like data and research or something like that, you can get a one-page thing on every prison that gives you all those numbers I gave you and more. So actually a lot of that stuff is very much available. As far, I love the idea of comparing growth in the DOC to the growth in the DNR and the growth in the Department of Education and whatnot. That's really good. Minnesota has, we do. It's not that they have more people in their county jails. They also have half as many people in their county jails as we do. What they have, and sorry, I'll try to keep this brief. They have a different way of funding it. You know, sometimes it all comes down to just money, unfortunately.
It does.
In Minnesota, if you are an adult who lives in Hennepin County and you get sent to prison, Hennepin County gets a bill for your upkeep, for your maintenance. In Wisconsin, if you live in Milwaukee County and get sent to prison, Milwaukee County's off the hook. The state of Wisconsin picks up the whole cost. But you know how what we did differently in Wisconsin is, some of you might remember about 20 years ago, they moved so that in the juvenile system, it works just like Minnesota's adult system. So in the juvenile system, if we have a kid, God forbid, at Lincoln Hills from Milwaukee County gets a bill for like $120,000 a year for the cost of that kid. It's interesting that as soon as we started doing that, we started sending a lot less kids to juvenile detention facilities. We started finding a lot more local solutions, and now it's a pretty small number. In Minnesota, that's kind of what they found, that it's because counties get a bill for everybody they send to prison. Counties have all kinds of incentive to say, let's see if we can find some other solutions. Let's up our treatment alternatives and diversions. Let's up the number of people we put on supervision instead of sending to prison, et cetera. So that's what's different about them.
My second comment is, my takeaway is the same. We got to get more progressive people in Madison. And in this election cycle, we have to ask people, if somebody who's ever running, about this budget stuff. Throw it at them.
Yeah.
Everyone, either side of the ticket.
I agree.
Okay, Joanne, and then I want to remind David to plug our MICA event on Tuesday.
Thank you.
So Joanne, go ahead.
Okay, well, two things. One related to the cost of this is that Black infant mortality rate, I guess, in Wisconsin is the worst in the country. So some might think that all these fathers being in prison might have something to do with the very low rate of, babies surviving in the Black community. And the other is that I'd like to recommend a book that has to Halfway Home: Race, Punishment, and the Afterlife of Mass Incarceration. And this is written by Reuben Jonathan Miller, Black assistant professor at the University of Chicago, whose brother is in prison. And he actually takes a job where he is working with people on parole, and he is telling about, the awful requirements that it is to survive the parole process. So I'd recommend that book. That's it.
Thank you.
David, do you want to put in your plug?
Sure.
And then I'll just say that we probably need to, if there's some last words you wanted to say, we might need to circle around and close.
Sure.
Okay.
And, I hate to say that I came unprepared a little bit for it, but on Tuesday evening, MICA in Milwaukee has their annual Black History Month event. It's one more time going to be virtual. I believe it's at 6 o'clock. Lorraine, if I send you an email about that, can you just forward it to everybody who was
Yes.
here?
Yes.
So
It's at 7 o'clock.
it's at
$20.
7 o'clock. See, I'm
Yep.
I'm like way unprepared. So yeah, it's 7 o'clock. It's always very good. I certainly enjoy it every year. And I'll send Lorraine an email to forward to the rest of you about what it is. They are requesting a $20 donation because this actually is replacing a fundraiser. So I do hope that some of you can make it, and I'll send you an email and pass it on.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being with us today. It's so much information that I wasn't aware of. My head hurts, but I appreciate it. I needed it. So, and Pat, thank you so much for making this happen. So, I just wanted to let people know that with the mix up in chat, if you get to me, like the title of that book, the information you wanted to express to someone else, get that email to me. I'll send it out to our two major email groups. There's the chronologically gifted group and the social justice group. So please get that to me. I'll send out a special email just to those two groups about, contacts and information about it. Someone asked about how to look further. We do record these forums, and they're on the First Church YouTube channel too. So I'll get that link for you too. So that can all happen if you get to me the information. And I think we kind of have to close now. So I know that Anne has her hand up, but is there something? Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. And hopefully all these final comments will be erased.
Wunderbar.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all.
David. Thank you.
Thank you.
David.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank
David,
you.
the master of the elevator speech.
Bye.